Hey, what up, everybody? Welcome back to the Texas Longhorns Orange Bloods football YouTube channel. I'm Ari Temkin along with Geoff Ketchum, and every single Wednesday we're going to be breaking down the transfer portal because that is a huge piece now to the Texas Longhorns roster management and roster building. So without further ado, Ketch, let's just pick up where Sark left off this week, which was with that number that you have been explaining all week, how Texas can get to that number, which is 33. Sark brought up the fact that he thinks that there'll be 33 new players in this roster next year. And I mean, it's pretty clear that the Texas administration, based on what Sark said on Monday, and then what Chris Del Conte released on the 40 Acres Weekly, that they're putting the blame for this season on the players. And it's not a coaching issue. This is a player issue. And so with that being said, I expect to see pretty significant turnover of this roster in 2022.
Yeah, it's funny how narratives take hold and become things, because a month ago, Texas was coming off of a loss to Oklahoma, and it was all about getting to the Big 12 championship game and having a rematch with Oklahoma. And there really wasn't a discussion about we don't have depth, we don't have players, we don't have enough players, we don't have the right players. The idea at the time was that Steve Sarkisian everybody thought that, that this was a program that was close. And a month later, and I'm starting to think it really doesn't matter how we got here. We're here, right? So right. Sarkisian is telling everybody, and I think that the seeds are being planted by the athletic department, the head of it, and Chris Del Conte, that look at the foundation cracks that we have. And to be fair, there are legitimate foundation cracks. Be prepared for kind of a rebuild. And that just, I think it's important to acknowledge that going into Sarkisian's first season, that there was a really healthy conversation to be had about the talent that they needed to be a championship level team, which most people did not think they had. I mean, they weren't predicted to go to the Big 12 championship game before the season started.
Right.
But rebuild was like a 4-letter word in July. Fans did not want to hear that. And it really wasn't pushed at all early on.
Nope.
And now that we're 4-6, there's a lot of conversations now about 2022. And, that's where we are. How we got here matters less than here we are. And Steve Sarkisian has pretty much announced, look, we're going to take 33. Why does he want to take 33? Because that's the most the NCAA will allow him to take based on the rule changes that have been made. If further legislation comes in, let's say in March, that says, hey, you can do whatever you need to do to get to 85 scholarships, and you're not hamstrung by a 32+1 salary cap, 33 could turn into 40 real easily for the Longhorns in this offseason. And then we would be talking about in 2022, how nearly 50% of the roster has been overhauled. They seem all in on the idea of a very healthy rebuild. It's not a bad plan. Now they have to execute it. And part of the thing that you and I'll be talking about every week is the players that are in the portal. And if you're Sark, you've got 11 spots left right now. You've got 22 commitments. One of those, or I guess you've got 12 spots left because you can take up to 33, but they're at 22 right now. So even if they move the math around, they really can only take 11. Sorry. So who are the 11? When do you say that's my guy? You know what I mean? Because
right.
They may be looking at this saying, we'd like to get a wide receiver out of the portal to improve the wide receiving core. When do you say yes? Who do you take that gamble on? Do you look at a guy and say, no, we want to wait? Because I really believe part of what happened with the offensive line early on last year is that there were guys from Buffalo and guys from Utah, the Utah states of the world, if you will, Memphis. And I think the coaches were like, no, let's hang in there and wait until one of our guys from Alabama or LSU or Auburn jumps. It never happened. And if there were small cases of it happening, those guys weren't interested in going to Texas. So when Texas goes shopping and who they go shopping for is going to be a really curious game all season long, because we will be evaluating their decisions in real time. And it will be part of the story going into 2022 when guys are on the field. There will have been these discussions about, is that the right guy to take? I'm really curious to see how all of this unfolds.
I agree. And I think the method is the important part of this. You probably have to have a list, 50 players or so, positional breakdown. And you say, all right, here are the players who put stars next to their names on guys we will automatically offer. This is a guy that he's taken one of the 11 spots. He can have it. Then you've got to go, who's your second level guys, third level guys, and second level guys. You want to make sure that they feel like they're part of that 11 group.
Well, and real quick, Ari, those first level guys, they're the ones that everybody probably wants. So it's hard to reserve. Texas is doing that with high school kids right now. They've got open spots in this class, but they're all reserved for big dogs right now. And when you come off of that and step down a tier is a different decision for everybody when you're forced to do that. I think Texas is going to have to mostly shop from tier 2. They'll want to shop in tier 1. And the question will become, how much bigger are your eyes than your stomach?
Yeah. The one guy, there's a couple of guys I want to point out that are definitely tier 1 guys that everybody's going to be after. There's a point I want to make after the fact after I do that. So I just want to make that preface. So there's Simi Moala, who is 6'7", 315-pound tackle from Utah. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. And here's he's got basically everything you're looking for in terms of, he was a 2015 recruit who then went on a 2-year mission trip. So this is a man.
He's a grown man.
This is a grown man here.
He's drawing Social Security.
Right. Like he's in his early 20s now. Okay. So to me, he's perfect size, positional need guy that is, it's a fully grown man as opposed to an 18, 19-year-old kid. I do wonder if there's the BYU connection because he is Mormon and has gone on mission trips, and obviously he spent some time at Utah. So I wonder if there is, wanting to move away, to go to a place like Texas. But to me, he's the perfect prospect for Texas, a guy that could step in right away along the offensive line and be an anchor, either left or right tackle, because he can play both.
Yeah. And look, so the question really, I think we're going to really be talking about with a lot of the offensive linemen, it's going to come down to, this guy's going to start for pretty much anywhere he goes. He doesn't have to worry about, he's going to be able to pick and choose, right? It's like, well, do you want to go to USC? No, they've got a returning player at right tackle. So I won't be looking at USC, but Oregon needs a right tackle. Okay. So Oregon's a school. So he's going to have these options stacked up. And then it's going to come down to, probably for him specifically, what kind of support system do you have for players that fit his profile? Not just Mormon, but, of that area, that group of guys. I mean, Junior Angelau is probably a feather in the cap for the Longhorns, to at least for him specifically to say, you will or will not fit into Austin.
Right.
And this coaching staff and support system will or will not be able to help you. At least they've got a little bit of that. A lot of times whether it's island kids or Mormons, there are various little subgroups of guys. If you want to recruit a kid out of Hawaii, it helps to have some other Hawaiian kids that they can relate to. Of the same thing with Utah. So this is a guy that I think that will matter. And then immediate playing time, which Texas has. And then he's going to have to ask himself, is Texas big time enough from where I'm moving on from? Because this is a kid that's leaving Utah. That's a top 25 program. If I'm not mistaken, they're the top 25 right now.
Yeah.
So Texas,
Cameron Rising.
Texas is going to pitch the portal. They're going to pitch, NIL. They're going to say, hey, you can make money at Texas in ways that maybe you can't elsewhere. And they'll have the data to probably support that. But they're going to have to prove to him that if he has options, that he's their best option. And where Texas is going to have problems is being the number one option that checks all of the various boxes. This is where if you're 9-3 instead of 5-7 at the end of the year, it really goes to help you quite a bit.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make about just this in general, and there's a few other names I've got on my list here, is, it's difficult to project. Football is a difficult sport to project. Look at NFL free agency. It's a perfect example of this. Michigan State rebuilt the team using the transfer portal, but they got a bunch of kids that were not on radars. Kenneth Walker III as a running back out of Wake Forest was not very highly on any of these transfer portal lists. Hendon Hooker, great example of Tennessee. This is a guy that if you watched him play at Virginia Tech, I brought this up before, he looked lost. If you watched Hendon Hooker play at Virginia Tech, there was no chance you thought he'd go to Tennessee and start. Fit, scheme, that stuff matters a ton. Guys may look really bad at one spot, and then all of a sudden they look really good at another spot. That could work in a very advantageous spot for Texas to where, all right, maybe they're not garnering a ton of headlines in the offseason by guys they're bringing in through the portal, but if they identify certain players with certain criteria in scouting that fit the needs and the skill set that they want for what the schemes they're running, then it doesn't really matter how highly heralded or, 4-star recruit coming out or top 100 prospect coming out. None of that stuff matters if you get guys that fit what you're trying to do and there's college tape on them and you can see they're already doing some of the things you need them to do. That's it. It's just not like, look, stars matter. We know that. We've seen that. There's the blue chip ratio. There's a ton of, and I obviously this matters too, even at this level, but it's kind of like NFL free agency where you got guys that have individual talent that might not fit on your roster and they might not work. And now you're settled to the big contract. That's obviously not the case at the collegiate level, but it's all about fit, and football is weird like that sometimes.
What I think is really interesting about Michigan State, if you look at the total, I was reading an article from a local, I think MLive earlier this week, and it mentioned that they had brought in 41 new players. Now, some of those were walk-ons, so the numbers are somewhat, it's a combination of incoming recruiting class, transfers, walk-ons, all of it. But they brought in a high volume. I believe they've only got 5 starters from the portal. So they had the advantage that Texas probably won't have, which is they're not hitting in year one on all of their portal hits, but they took enough that they had some wiggle room, right? Because if I say to you right now, Texas comes away with 6 new starters, regardless of position through the portal, you're probably not thinking they just took 6. But you'll probably go, wow, that's 25% of all starters. That's a huge number, really.
Very true. Very true.
So I think that Texas will have to hit they'll have fewer to give because they're going to have more incoming freshmen. And it'll be important that they hit, and they can't take luxury guys because they took a guy like Keelan Robinson at running back, who I don't know that anybody is seeing Keelan Robinson and doesn't think that he's good enough to almost play for anybody. He's good, but he's their 3rd string running back right now. And in a program with a ton of needs, no matter how good Keelan Robinson is, if he's your 3rd string running back and you need immediate help everywhere, they missed them. Again, part of the problem for this season was that Sarkisian failed at preparing his roster.
Yeah.
Both through the portal and just kind of big picture planning. That can't happen this year. So if they've got 10 guys that they can take from the portal, luxury takes when you're 4-8 or 5-7 or 6-6, I think they've got to be careful because they got no help from the offensive line, and there will be offensive linemen available, but they got a 3rd string running back who will help next year. But boy, when you're 4-6 and struggling to make a bowl game, An extra starting anything sounds good right about now.
No, that's a great point. Keelan Robinson, probably a guy that, that Sark thought, I'll bring him over. He'll help to be one of my guys to bridge the gap in that locker room. And yeah, I mean, now you're left with the guy. It's like, okay, I've got freshmen coming in. Was the blue kid, that running, like, so they're still going to have plenty of depth at running back. To your point. The other thing too is, like, running backs is a great example of this. Like, look at Abram Smith at Baylor. This is a guy that they converted from linebacker, is now leading the Big 12 in rushing.
And he was playing defense last year.
Playing defense. Jalen Warren is a guy that was at Utah State that, like, Matt Wells, who was recruiting him at Utah State, didn't feel like he could play at the Power 5 level, is now one of the best running backs in the Big 12 for Oklahoma State. So running back is a really interesting position unto itself, but it's also a good example of sometimes you can get guys to switch positions and all of a sudden they become plus players at a different position. Again, this is just all about scouting internally and then scouting outside to see, okay, who fits, whether or not they have the stars or the acclaim or whatever, they're on these lists. That doesn't matter as much as figuring out guys that are going to fit what you're trying to do.
That's a great point that hasn't really been mentioned enough, is that when this season's over, Texas is going to have to do what Baylor did a year ago with Dave Aranda, and they're going to do an entire roster audit and say, look, Abram's pretty good as a defensive player, right? Like, he was on that side of the ball, but it was like, now he's one of the best players in the Big 12.
Right.
And that move happened because the coaches said, we think there's a place where you can do more for us. And the byproduct of that for him is going to be, that kid's going to get a chance on Sunday now to play running back. And as a drafted player, I'm guessing, I mean,
yeah,
I don't want to go crazy, but the kid's averaging 7.5 yards per carry. He's probably going to be a top 4 or 5 round type of player. That was not who he was. And so every little nuanced change matters. And one of the things that didn't happen with the Texas roster a lot this offseason was that kind of move. I think it'll be interesting to see, can Sarkisian fill some of the gaps with talent that's in the program, that they're the geniuses, right? They're the experts. And they've got a guy in Jatavian Sanders who's a 5-star 5th-string tight end right now that could be playing defense for them right now. And oh, by the way, it's the worst defense in the history of the program. So, like, all hands on deck. It'll be interesting to see who can buy in and whether or not they can find some all hands on deck type of moves. Because if you can hit a home run, I mean, Baylor isn't where they are right now without that one little twist of fate that they created. That didn't happen by accident. Dave Aranda and that coaching staff did a really unpopular thing, I'm sure, when it happened, and said, we think you need to be here. And that was probably really scary for that kid.
Right.
And today, however much money he makes as a pro, he'll probably always remember, I kind of owe this to a coaching staff that saw more of me than I did at the time.
Well said. A few other names I want to throw out there. There's Alabama corner Marcus Banks, who Houston
Everybody
kid. I'm sure you remember him. I was going to say, I'm sure you remember him.
He's very good. Played 7 games as a true freshman a year ago, mostly on special teams. But that dude has played in playoff games, and he's started. He's been a starting player for Bama.
Yeah, good size. Again, he's from Houston, so maybe there's the Texas connection there, and maybe you can use Sark and Jeff Banks from their time being in the Alabama locker room, and we know Jeff Banks is dynamite recruiter. There's Joffrey Brown, who is a wide receiver from North Carolina. He is the younger brother of De'Ami Brown, 6 foot, 180 pounds. De'Ami Brown says that his younger brother, Joffrey, is faster than him. Sign that kid up. He's in the portal. I don't think you can have enough playmakers. One of the issues I think with this team this year is, like, who's your playmakers? A true freshman wide receiver, it's Xavier Worthy and Bijan Robinson. Like, that's it. That's basically, like, that's what you have on offense in terms of guys you're needing to make plays. So this team can definitely add more playmakers, especially in their wide receiving core.
I think you're going to see I don't even, they're nameless faces at this point, but anytime Alabama has someone enter the portal from the skill positions, those are probably going to be players that Banks, Flood, Sarkisian had a real hand in recruiting.
Yep.
And we saw it a year ago when they went and got Ben Davis out of the portal. You know, they value the guys that they've seen. I think as long as there's still players on that Alabama roster that Texas has experience within this staff, you know, you and I can't determine the name, but there will be receivers and running backs that enter the portal. Those to me would be obvious candidates of guys, not necessarily at running back, but certainly at wide receiver.
Right.
And it partly because Alabama will look to improve through the portal. They did it this year at wide receivers. So my guess is Nick Saban's like, we got to do that again next year. Let's go find another super impact guy that is ready to play right away. Can I give you a couple of names?
Please.
So there's the offensive lineman. The guys that you mentioned are A-list guys.
Right.
There's two other guys, and Texas is talking to Marcus Banks. Like, that's one we're absolutely following. There's the kid out of Clemson, offensive lineman named Paul Tychio.
Yeah.
And 14 career games with Clemson. He's a guy that, you know, his leaving Clemson is because he wasn't starting now, but he's viewed as a former high-level recruit that has game experience at a high level. And I think he'll be wanted by everybody in the portal. And Kyle Flood has a history with him. The other guy may be the number one guy in the portal right now is the offensive lineman from Oregon, Kingsley Suma Ataya, I believe is how you say.
I think he already committed to BYU.
Yeah, but committed ain't the same as signed. And
True.
He may end up at BYU, but that is not going to stop teams from letting. He probably entered the portal thinking, I'm going from Oregon to BYU. And that might be my word as strong as oak, right? Like, it might be.
No, you're right. I mean, he is as legitimate as a player. I mean, he's probably the number one player in the portal.
I mean, we're talking about potentially a first-round draft pick down the road. And so that's the only reason why I mention it. He is 5-star level talent, super young. So he still has like his sticker price. This isn't 5-star guy who's 3 years at Oregon and hasn't seen the field. He was a 5-star prospect 9 months ago.
Right.
So while he probably ends up at BYU, he's there. And if you were ever going to do something that broke the rules for a kid, he's a guy that I think schools, like, that kid may say, hey, I'm committed to BYU. And that might not stop an SEC school from saying, yeah, but what if we gave you $25,000 for 20 minutes of your time? Like, we just want to talk to you. Or somebody who behind the scenes is like, hey, you're an uncle, huh? You want a job? Like,
right.
He is that type of talent where I think some schools will be like, oh, that's cute, you're going to BYU. So I only mentioned his name because there's really nobody else in the portal like that guy yet. I mean, I almost look at him and Marcus Banks as the two guys right now that are in the portal. I mean, it's mid-season, so this isn't the best time to shop. But for right now, they're the top two guys for me. If you told me that one of those guys ended up at Ohio State and the other one ends up at Alabama, it wouldn't shock me. If you're Texas, some kid saying they're going to BYU should be like some kid. It'd be like Kelvin Banks. I'm committed to Oregon. Yeah. You want to come in for an official visit? You can be committed and still come in for an official visit. And the thing about the kid from Oregon, these guys all get visits again. So you'll see guys, he can't sign until the 15th. So he's got a month. And I think in a month, maybe, look, if he's going on a 2-year mission, whatever, right? Like, all bets are off. But if this dude's like, I want to play for a national championship, if at all possible, well, then Nick Saban probably comes knocking at the door, or Ohio State, or Clemson, or
Georgia.
Texas A&M potentially. Like the other thing Texas will have to deal with is for kids like Marcus Banks who might want to come back home. Texas is an option one right now amongst big time programs. And so it may be Ty goes to the team that wasn't 5-7.
Yeah, you're right. As tough of a reality as that is to face. All right, make sure to keep tuned right here to the Texas Longhorns Orange Bloods football YouTube channel. We've got plenty of great content coming out on recruiting. We've got a Malcolm Roach interview coming out, Joseph Osai, plenty of former Longhorn football players eager to talk about what's going on with the football program right now. And of course, transfer talk each and every week where we've got names, plenty of stuff in the portal talk. But Ketch, appreciate you, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah, and next week now we just got to start competing with t-shirts because I love your Star Wars Millennium Falcon t-shirt. And I'm sitting here with a collared shirt and I'm just feeling like you showed me up a little bit because I've just got a plain button up on, but people will remember the Falcon. So if you like the Millennium Falcon, give this video a like. And by the way, I'd check out the comments section. Let us know, like, who's your guy in the portal right now? If you could have anybody and why, it's past time to start having those conversations.
Yeah, who's your Obi-Wan? Help us, Obi-Wan. You're our only hope.
Or your Luke. Yeah, is there a Luke in there? Like, I think the offensive lineman from Oregon's a young Luke, is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
All right, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe as well if you have not yet already, and ring the bell. That way you're always notified we post new videos, and we're constantly posting new videos. But for now, we are out. Peace.
See you.